Transfer of Property Act. The, the Transfer of Property Act 1882 covers movable property, immovable property. The transfer of property was enacted in the year 1882. Within the meaning of Section 3 of the Transfer of Property Act, the immovable property does not include only standing timber, growing crops, or grass. Actionable claims shared in company. Under Section 3 of Transfer of Property Act, the following does not amount to notice. Registration where the instrument is not compulsory, bill registered. Attested in relation of instrument means and shall be deemed always have been attested by at least two witnesses. The property is comprehensive term including copyright. Immovable property does not include timber, true, which is not immovable property. Growing crops. Under Section 3 Transfer of Property Act, immovable property include none of these. An instrument is defined in the Section 3 of Transfer of Property Act means non-testamentary instrument. Under the Transfer of Property Act 1882, a person is said to have notice of a fact when he actually knows the fact. Which one of the following section of Transfer of Property define notice? Section 3. The Privy Council decision in Tilakdhari Lal versus Khedan Lal related to Section 3 of the Transfer of Property Act. In Transfer of Property Act, immovable property does not include standing timber. Which out of the following immovable property according to TP Act 1882? Standing timber. The following is not a immovable property. Royalty. Which one of the following pair is not correctly matched? Immovable property. Section 2. Correctly match are charged. Section 100 marshalling by subsequent purchaser. Section 56 mortgage debt 134. Which one of the following immovable property is under Transfer of Property Act? Equity of redemption, a hurt, a mortgage debt, all are immovable property. Under the Transfer of Property Act 1882, the term attested means attested by at least two or more witnesses. Immovable property does not include standing timber. Which of these immovable property, as per the provision of Transfer of Property Act? Fruit trees. Under Section 3 of Transfer of Property Act, attested in the relation to the instrument means attested by at least two witnesses. Immovable property does not include grass, growing crops, standing timber. Which one of the following is not immovable property? Standing timber. According to Section 3 of Transfer of Property Act 1882, instrument means non-testamentary instrument. Standing timber under Transfer of Property Act 1882 is not immovable property. Instrument under the Transfer of Property Act is Property Act 1882 means non-testamentary instrument. For a valid attestation or instrument under the Transfer of Property Act 1882, it is necessary that each attesting witness must be signed instrument in the presence of executant. Which is not immovable property? growing crops. According to Transfer of Property Act, immovable property does not include standing timber, growing crops, and grass. Which one of the following property has not recognized by the court as immovable property? Right to worship. Which one of the following is the immovable property? Profit a pendre. Profit a pendre means benefit arises out of the land. The chapter and section of the Transfer of Property Act which related to contract shall not be taken as a part of contract and supplementary to Registration Act. The provision of Transfer of Property Act apply to the immovable property mostly, however, some provision apply to immovable property as well as movable property. Subject matter of transfer of property by way of sale under transfer of property can be only immovable property. Things embedded in the earth have been included under the Transfer of Property Act. It defined is a definition of attached to the earth. Who may make rule consistent with the provision of TP Act? State government. Which among the following is immovable property as per section 3 of Transfer of Property Act? Fruit tree. According to the Transfer of Property Act, immovable property does not include growing crops. Rule against perpetuity is given by Transfer of Property Act does not affect the general rule of Mohammedan law. Which one of the following is not immovable property? A decree which gives right of the sale of immovable property of the husband. Chapter Transfer of Property Act 1882 come into the force on none of these. TP Act come into the force on 17 February 1882. Transfer of property came into the force on July 1, 1882. Transfer of Property Act has no relation with air, water, light, all of this. Chapter 2 Transfer of Property by Act of Party 5 to 53. Chapter 2 of Transfer of Property shall not deem to effect of any rule of Mohammedan law. Transfer of Property Act govern transfer of between the party only. Under Section 5 of TP Act, the person include company and association or the body of individual. According to Section 5 of Transfer of Property Act, term living person include company or association or body of individual. According to Section 5 of TP Act, the person include company or association or a individual. Which one of the following section of TP Act define Transfer of Property Act? Section 5. In respect of the transfer of property under Transfer of Property Act, which one of the following statement is true? One cannot transfer the property to the self. The expression living person used in Section 5 of the Transfer of Property Act includes company, association, incorporate, body, or individual, which is not covered by the term Transfer of Property Act. Family settlement. Which one of the following is not a transfer of property? According to TP Act, about abandonment of claim of property. Which one of the following is not in the term of living person under Section 5 of the TP Act? Company, association, body of individual. Which one of the following section of Transfer of Property Act define transfer of property? Section 5. Under Section 5 of TP Act, living person does include company also. True. What property cannot be transferred under Section 6 of TP Act 1882? An easement apart from the dominant heritage, an interest in the property, enjoyment of the owner personally, a right of the future maintenance whatsoever manner arises, secured or determined. Change of heir apparent. succeeding of estate cannot be transferred. Which provision of transfer of property of Act stated that? Section 6. Which one of the following statement is correct? A mere right to sue cannot be transferred. Who one of the following section of the Transfer of Property Act provide that mere right to sue cannot be transferred? Section 6. Under the provision of Transfer of Property Act, the unborn child acquired vested interest in upon his birth. Which one of these cannot lawfully transferred as per the Transfer of Property Act? Salary and public officer. Salary of public officer. As per Section 6 of TP Act, an easement be transferred apart from dominant heritage cannot be. Under the provision of Transfer of Property Act, an easement can be transferred apart from the dominant heritage. The statement is true. Cannot be transferred. Which property cannot be transferred? Public officer office may right to succeed, may right to re-entry. How many exceptions are mentioned under Section 6 of Transfer of Property Act? 10. Which interest is not transferable? Mere species of succession. Mere species succession. The expression species succession means mere chance and hope of succession. Which cannot be transferred? Mere right to sue on the basis of agreement of sale. Which one of the following property cannot be transferred? Right to future maintenance. Which one of the following transferable under the Transfer of Property Act 1882? None of these. Point out the correct answer. Under Transfer of Property Act 1882, the salary of public officer cannot be transferred. A transfer of 5,000 to his niece, a transfer rupees 5,000 to his niece if she will desert her husband. The transfer is void. Which one of the following properties may be transferred? Immovable property. Which one of the following is not an essential element of a valid transfer of the property? Transferee may not be competent to take the transfer. The right to future maintenance in whatsoever manner arising and secured or determined cannot be transferred. What is a transfer under Transfer of Property Act? An easement along with the dominant heritage. Whether the transfer can be made in the favor of unborn person? Yes, by machinery of trust. On a transfer of his benefit, an unborn person acquired a vested interest in upon his birth. What kind of property is transferable? Any kind of property, if not prohibited by law. Which one of the following interests is not transferable? Space succession. What may be transferred? A right to re-entry to the owner for the breach of condition of subsequent. Person competent to transfer a property have been defined under which one of the following section of TP? Section 7. Which one of the following section of TP Act 1882 say transfer of property may be made without writing in every case in which writing is not expressly required by law? Section 9. Which one of the following section of the Transfer of Property Act related to oral transfer? Section 9. Section 9 of TP Act is provided under transfer can be oral without writing also. In Transfer of Property Act, condition of oral transfer are provided under Section 10. Section 9. Section 9 of Transfer of Property Act provided transfer can be oral also. Section 9 of Transfer of Property Act, oral transfer are conditionally valid. Under the Transfer of Property Act 1882, a writing is not expressly required by law. A transfer of property may be made without writing in every case. Whether an oral transfer of the property is legal under the provision of Transfer of Property Act. Yes, in certain cases. Condition restraining alienation under Section 10 of TP Act is make the condition invalid but transfer remain valid. Which one of the following is invalid as per the Section 10 of Transfer of Property Act 1882? A condition not to sell during lifetime of the transferee. Under Transfer of Property Act 1882, a transfer rupees 5,000 to B on the condition that he shall marry with the consent of CDE. E died, B marries with the consent of C and D. The condition is marriage is valid. The absolute restraint of transfer of property is void under Section 10 of Transfer of Property Act. Section 10 of Transfer of Property Act provides for condition restraining alienation. Condition restraining alienation of transfer of property is given under Section 10 of Transfer of Property Act. Birth. Which one of the following section of Transfer of Property Act 1882 is concerned with the transfer of benefit of unborn child? Section 13. In which one of the following section of TP Act transfer in the favor of unborn person can be made? Section 13. For creating an interest in the favor of an unborn person, which one of the following is essential? Creation of prior life interest in the favor of living person. Unborn person must be born before termination of last prior life interest. Absolute interest is to be given to unborn person. In which section the rule against the perpetuity was propounded? Section 14. No transfer of property can operate to create an interest which is to take effect after the lifetime of one or more person living at the date of such transfer. These provisions come under rule against perpetuity. Rules against perpetuity is applicable to both movable and immovable property. Rule against perpetuity is laid down under Section dash of the Transfer of Property Act, Section 14. Under Transfer of Property Act 1882, which one of the following is correctly matched? Rules against perpetuity, Section 14. The rule against perpetuity do not apply to which one of the following? Charities. Rule against perpetuity prescribed that no transfer of property can operate to create an interest which is to be taken effect after the lifetime of one or more person living on the date of such transfer. Section 14 of TP Act deals with rule against perpetuity. Which one of the following is an exception of the rule against perpetuity? Permanent transfer of a gift, personal covenants, presumption. Section 14 of Transfer of Property Act deal with rules against perpetuity. A transfer his property to B for life and thereafter to his unborn son for life. In this case, transfer of property to unborn son is void. Which out of the following does not constitute an exception to rules against perpetuity? A fund to be bequeathed to the next 7 generations. Which one of the following section of TP Act deals with rules against perpetuity? Section 14. Rule against perpetuity described in Section 14 of TP Act. Rule against perpetuity is not applicable to the case where property is transferred for the benefit of public. Section 40 of TPA provide rules against perpetuity. This rule is based on the public policy. Which one of the following section of TPA deals with direction for accumulation? Section 17. According to Section 18 of TPA Act, the provision of some sections shall not apply in the case of transfer of property for the benefit of the public in the advancement of religious knowledge, commerce, health, safety, or any other object beneficial to mankind. These sections are Section 14, 16, 17. Which section create an exception to the restriction of Section 14, 16, 17 of Transfer of Property Act? Section 18. In which one of the provision of the Transfer of Property Act it was provided that rule against perpetuity does not apply when the transfer is for the benefit of public? Section 18. Section 19 of TPA Act related to the vested interest. A vested interest is not defeated by the death of the transferee before obtaining possession. Is provided in which one of the following section of Transfer of Property Act 1882? Section 19. Contingent interest in the property became the vested interest on the happening of uncertain event or when the happening of event became impossible. An unborn person acquired vested interest on immediately on birth. A transfer of property to B in trust for C and direct B to give possession of the property to C. When he attained the age of 25, C interest in the following is vested. Under the provision of Transfer of Property Act 1882, the unborn person acquires vested interest on transfer of his benefit upon his birth. Which one of the following is example of valid conditional transfer? A transfer of rupees 500 A to B on the condition that he shall execute certain lease within 3 months after A's death. A man gift his property to temple subject to the condition on the death of his wife. What created by the transaction? Vested interest. Wherein on the transfer of the property and interest therein is created in the favor of the person to take effect only at the happening of a specified uncertain event, the transfer is called contingent interest. Which one of the following would be valid transfer under the Transfer of Property Act 1882? A transfer of rupees 5,000 to be condition that he shall marry with the consent of CDE. E dies with the consent of CDE. E dies. B marry with the consent of CD. Rule against perpetuity is a rule fixing the maximum period of time for which vesting of property can be postponed. A transfer rupees 5,000 to B on the condition that he shall marry with the consent of C, D, E. E dies. B marry with the consent of C and D. It deemed that A is fulfilled the condition. Under Transfer of Property Act 1882, when can an unborn person acquire a vested interest on the transfer of his benefit? Upon his birth. When does the unborn person acquire the vested interest on transfer? As soon as he is born. The unborn person acquired vested interest on the transfer for the benefit of none of the above. Under the provision of transfer of property, the unborn child acquired the vested interest upon his birth. Section 21 of Transfer of Property Act 1882 contains the provision relating to contingent interest. Section 25 of TP Act deals with condition precedent. A let B a farm on the condition that B shall walk 100 miles in an hour. Lease is void. A let the farm to B on the condition that he shall walk 100 miles in an hour. The lease is void under Section 25 of TPA. A give 500 to B on the condition that B shall marry A daughter G. On the date of transfer of G was date, the transfer is void under which section of the TP Act? Section 25. A let a farm to B on the condition that he shall walk 100 miles in an hour. The lease is void. In a case of transfer depend upon the condition precedent, the transfer takes place when the condition is substantially fulfilled. A transfer rupees 5,000 to B on the condition that he shall marry with the consent of CDE. B marry without the consent of CDE, but obtain their consent after the marriage. Has B fulfilled the condition? No. Provision based on the doctrine of acceleration under Transfer of Property Act 1882 is Section 27. A transfer rupees 5,000 to B on the condition that he shall execute certain lease within 3 months after A's death, and if he should neglect to do so, to C, B dies in A's lifetime. Which section of the Transfer of Property Act 1882 shall apply in the deciding the legal right of C? Section 27. A transferred a firm to B for his life with a proviso that in case B cut down a certain wood, the transfer shall be ceased to have any effect. B cut down the wood. What will be the effect of the life interest of the firm? Loses. Section 35 of Transfer of Property Act 1882 applicable to movable, immovable, every kind of property. Muhammad Afzal versus Ghulam Qasim is a leading case on which one of the following? Doctrine of election. Which one of the following deals with the doctrine of election? Section 35. The foundation of doctrine of election under the Transfer of Property Act 1882 is that person taking the benefit of an instrument must bear the burden. The doctrine of election is applicable to Hindu, Muslim, Christian, all of the above. Section 36 of Transfer of Property Act is related to doctrine of apportionment. Doctrine of Cyprus 26, Doctrine of Acceleration 36, Doctrine of Election 35. Section 37 of Transfer of Property Act on the right to proceed the revenue compensation on acquisition is based on Doctrine of Contribution. Section 38 of Transfer of Property Act has no application to previous transfer where the transaction is still incomplete. Principle laid down by the Privy Council as to the constructive notice, the real title as provided in Section 41 was reaffirmed by Supreme Court in Jamuna Masbazdi Makade versus Kodi Mandira Deval. The transfer of ostensible owner is provided in the section of Transfer of Property 1882, Section 41. Which one of the following doctrine find application of Section 43 of the Transfer of Property Act? Doctrine of feeding ground by estoppel. The transfer of property by an ostensible owner for consideration shall not be voidable provided that transferee acted in good faith. The case of Jaya Dayal Podar versus B.V. Hazara is related to ostensible owner. Section 41 of TPA Act 1882 statutory application of law in which one of the following section of TP Act transfer by ostensible owner is provided. Section 41. In which one of the following is a case involving Section 41 of Transfer of Property Act. Suraj Ratan Tahirani versus Ahmedabad Tea and Company. Section 41 of the Transfer of Property Act 1882 applies to voluntary transfer and has no application to court sale. Section 41 regarding the transfer by ostensible owner is laid down in Section 41. Which one of the following section is not correctly matched? B. Which one is correctly matched? Right against perpetuity Section 41, vested interest Section 19, contingent interest Section 21. Section 41 of Transfer of Property Act is the statutory application of the law of estoppel. The statement is true. Which one of the following is not an essential requirement to make a transfer valid where transfer affected by an unauthorized person who subsequently acquires interest of the property transferred? Transferee opt the effect of transfer. Section 43 of Transfer of Property Act enable the transferee to whom transferor has made a fraudulently erroneous representation to lay hold at the option of any interest which the transferor may subsequently acquire the property, provided it does not adversely affect the right of any subsequent purchaser for the value without notice. Which one of the following is not an essential condition under Section 43 of Transfer of Property Act 1882? The representation must be necessarily to be fraudulent. Doctrine which requires that the transferor must be delivered the subsequent acquired property to transferee who acted upon the false representation and did harm to himself by paying money for what he could not get is called feeding grant by estoppel. Rule of feeding grant the estoppel is contained in Section 43 of Transfer of Property Act. A Hindu who has separated from his father B sailed to sea 3 fields X, Y, Z, representing that A is authorized to transfer this field. Z does not belong to A, but on B death is as their absence Z. C did not rescind the contract. C may require A to deliver Z to him. The doctrine which required that the transfer must be delivered the subsequent acquired property to transferee who acted upon the false representation did harm to himself by paying money for what he could get is called feeding grant by estoppel. X sell to Y property belonging to Z. Subsequently, Z dies and property devolves in X, by which doctrine the said sale is valid. Doctrine of feeding grant by estoppel. Section 44 of Transfer of Property deals with transfer by one co-owner. With transfer of property, only one of the competent co-owner of the property is legal. None of the above. A owing half share and B and C each a quarter share of Mauza Sultanpur exchange 1/8 share of that Mauza for the quarter share and Mauza for Lalpur. There being no agreement to contrary, A is entitled to the 8th sale of Lalpur, and B and C each is entitled to 1/16 of the share. Where immovable property is transferred for the consideration by person having distinct interest therein, by their interest in the property are equal value, the transferor are entitled to get equal share in the consideration. Under Section 49 of Transfer of Property Act, transferee entitled to the benefit of issuance covered against the loss and damages by fire. Within the meaning of Section 51 of Transfer of Property Act 1881, the transferee is entitled to the value of the improvement. Rule of lis pendens is applicable to the suit of specific performance of contract to transfer of immovable property. The statement is true. Under Section 52 of Transfer of Property Act 1882, the transferee will be bound by the result of the suit, whether the transferee has knowledge or not as to the litigation. Doctrine of lis pendens does not apply to the transaction before the summons in the suit served. Section 52 of Transfer of Property Act 1882 disposes the prohibition of transferor and otherwise dealing of any property during the pendency of suit, provided the condition laid down in the section are satisfied. The statement is true. Doctrine of lis pendens dealt under Section Dash of Transfer of Property Act 1882. 52. Doctrine of lis pendens apply where transfer is made after the decree of the trial court but before the filing of an appeal. Which one of the following is not an essential condition of application of rule of lis pendens under Section 52 of Transfer of Property Act 1882? Suit must be conclusive. The principle of lis pendens embodied in Section 52 of Transfer of Property Act pertain to public policy. Under Transfer of Property Act, in which one of the following matter the doctrine of lis pendens does not apply? Property including the plaint by an amendment of subsequent to the sale. The rule of lis pendens apply when the suit in which right of immovable